Preparing to live stream. Moment. Here we go. Live stream initiating. Done redirecting to YouTube. Preparing to live stream. There we are. We're live on YouTube. This is wonderful. Okay, now we go back over here and we click the local record on this computer. Okay, we are live. CNN is here. I mean, YouTube is here. Everybody, as you know, I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, and we are FractalU.com. And I'm joined by our regular host, Tufan Guven, geometricmodels.org, who will be making announcements in just a minute. And our special guest of honor tonight is Casey House. Casey is here to teach and tell stories about the amazing Bucky Fuller and the Bucky Fuller Synergetics and the Institute group that he's working with. And I'm going to do my 2-minute Bucky Fuller story in a second also. But first, Tufan has a few announcements. Would you like, Tufan?
Sure. Hi, everyone. First, let's start with next week's lecture from Dalia Ali. She will be talking about Todd Story, Ancient Egyptian Wisdom Lineage on June 1st at fractalu.com. And our new 5th International South France Conference in October 9 to 14. You can find the details at fractalfield.com/2025. And our early bird is ending in June 1, so we have 6 more days to go. And our tonight's special guest is Casey House, our hero. He's a great visionary artist, teacher, and founder of Synergetics University, cnu.com. And he's the great graphic designer behind the Sacred Geometry poster and the Synergetics poster available at geometricmodels.org. And I just love Casey's artwork, as he has a very unique talent and style of reflecting a very simple geometric philosophies into art. It's something that I love about Casey, and we are very happy to be working with him. And I would like to welcome you, Casey, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tufan.
Thank you, Casey. And so just since I'm the original host here, I get the privilege of the 2-minute, my minutes with Bucky Fuller, my 2 minutes here. So just to say, so when I was in electrical engineering at University of Detroit, a lot of them electrical engineers were a little bit uninspired. Whereas over in the architecture school, they were having some serious fun. So I used to hang out with them guys and they would work like 24 hours a day. Amazing group. Anywho, guess who shows up one day in the auditorium for the architecture school? It was Bucky Fuller. Amazing, extremely talkative, small, short fella, very wise and very quick. He was an expert on material science and architecture. And the next thing I knew, I'm carrying this great big geodesic dome to set it into this field with the whole architecture school. I mean, it was sort of, and then my next vignette, remember this is only a 2-minute, with Bucky was my friend Gus Ciccacci, the 1978 First International Conference, New Age Conference of the New Age at Fort Belvedere, Florence, Italy. And I lived with Bucky there for a week, actually, during which time he actually showed me personally how the vector flexor worked. And it was only later then that Tom Sawyer began to teach that the charge collapse in the vector flexor as a mechanism for superconductivity, which later then Nassim emulated. And we're going to talk later about the vector flexor and charge collapse and fun stuff. So I had the privilege of having a certain amount of fun with Bucky, along with the Sufis and major adventures there in Italy. And Bentov was there too, believe it or not. So that's my 2-minute Bucky story. I think we're back to Casey House here. Thank you, Tufan. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you, Dan.
Great.
So, yeah, Casey, tell us how were you introduced to Synergetics? Can you also give us a short background of yourself and how you got into this philosophy?
Yeah. So I went to Chico State in California, studying applied computer graphics, and I was wanting to become a Pixar animator and had dreams of doing animation for video studios and but but after some time of going to college, I was kind of always expected to be kind of the most successful person in my family. I don't know. I was always such an academic, like uh, very much into school. But once I got to college, I kind of became restless in terms of feeling like I was wasting time and money, and uh, didn't really feel like I was learning and in an atmosphere of learning that I really wanted. And so I decided to start traveling. And so I left college with zero money and started traveling the world. And in my travels, I started being more exposed to sacred geometry. And I think I'd come across a book by Drumvlo Melchizedek about the flower of life, and that kind of stimulated me in a way that was really exciting. And so, after some years of just kind of being fascinated by geometry, I was doing graphic design work at that time and kind of traveling, doing graphic design work for people. And I had a graphic design client who uh, saw my interest in geometry and asked me if I had ever heard of Buckminster Fuller. And I had heard the name before. I had built a geodesic dome before with some people and had a little bit of exposure to some of his ideas, but had never really gotten to know anything more than just geodesic domes. And this graphic design client of mine gave me the book Synergetics. And when I received the book, I just had this feeling that I've never had with any other book in my life. I felt like it was going to be an important cornerstone of my life for some reason. And I've never been a very big reader. Reading has never been kind of something that I spend a lot of time doing. But for some reason, when I received Synergetics, it spoke to me, and for the next 2 years after that, I slowly read Synergetics 1 and 2. And if any of you have encountered Synergetics before, you'll understand why it took me 2 years. Here, I'll just grab my my copy of Synergetics 1. This is the book he gave me, and I spent the 2 years underlining and starring passages throughout both books, and they quickly became my favorite books I've ever read. And I got this very powerful feeling that they hold keys for humanity's emergence from uh, a dissonant, destructive pattern thinking here on Earth, and that we can actually start to participate in nature's regenerative life support systems and create artifacts of health, wealth, and well-being without disturbing nature's integrity. And so I've spent the last 10 years now or so. I entered the Buckminster Fuller Challenge in 2017 with the idea to create a educational platform and textbook on synergetics because there's a there's a steep onboarding into synergetics and the work of Fuller that I think deters a lot of people. And I think it has been my responsibility as somebody who understands it to an extent and can create art and educational resources for it to sort of build bridges into this work for people to be able to digest it and understand it a little easier. Bucky had a way of speaking and writing that was pretty eclectic and often wrote long run-on sentences that took up whole pages, you know. And so for a lot of people, it's almost unreadable. And for some reason, when I read it, it completely made sense to me and spoke to me in a way that almost no other book has. And so I took that as a sign that, like, because it spoke to me so deeply, that it was my job and my responsibility to help it survive into this century. And as seeing as it was going out of print and no library that I've ever been in has Synergetics, no bookstore, I've never seen it in the wild. Uh, I've never seen anybody have it on their bookshelves. That to me, and considering I consider it to be one of the most important books of our time, it feels important to make sure that it doesn't become some lost, forgotten text. And so that's been my last decade, is creating these bridges into his work and just creating beautiful invitations into considering that there is an integrity to the shape of space and nature's coordinating that is in operation in all of our ecosystems, and that nature spontaneously generates these artifacts of integrity. You look at a flower, and a flower didn't have to have a board meeting about how to create beautiful fragrance and geometry and all of these things. It spontaneously generated these patterns of integrity that we can look at in amazement and somehow think that we are not a part of that same network of intelligence. And so I think it's only a matter of time until humanity starts to spontaneously generate these artifacts of integrity. We become local limbs of an integrity cosmos, and uh, and it's my small contribution to create art that sort of invites people into that possibility.
That's
It's so
great.
beautiful, Casey. I just wanted to say one thing that if I remember Bucky's lectures, his way of speaking was also extremely long run-on sentences.
Yeah.
However, his enthusiasm was absolutely contagious.
Mm.
So, Casey, were you going to have some visuals then? You have a slideshow for us, is that right? Yep.
Yeah, I don't have quite a slideshow, but I have some things to share that I've put
Great.
together.
Great. And
Because
for the ones who don't know much about Synergetics, can you describe it in a basic way and then maybe show us some geometries about it?
Yeah. So, Synergetics is explorations in the geometry of thinking, as Fuller put it. And thinking is uh, a dismissal of irrelevancies. It's honing in on the omnidirectional halo of relevance in our lives. So there's this lucidly relevant band halo of consideration that we have. There's events that are too large and too far for us to be able to consider, and there's also events that are too small and too frequent for us to consider. And then there's the Goldilocks zone, the halo of consideration that we have. And thinking is the dismissal of irrelevancies to the object of our consideration. And so Fuller talked about events being star events, if you will, these star events that happen in our lives that we can consider. And the first considerable set of events with an inside and an outside is a tetrahedron. And so that's, I guess, where we'll begin today, is with that. And I'll start sharing my screen.
it's interesting the tetrahedron is where Hebrew was born and heart muscle too. That was the most elegant.
Hmm. So this is the new poster I have designed for geometric models as in a collaboration with Synergetics University, my work that I have created in order to sort of build a database of information around synergetics. You can check out more about that through my website, casey-house.com or syn-u.com.
We'll
And
include the website on the description part as well. Right.
thank you. Yeah. And so we can just start. I'll just start from the beginning. This poster, I've laid it out in a way that is numerical, and you can read all of the descriptions about each of the geometries that are shown here at the bottom. But each one is given a number, and I'll just start with number one and kind of work our way through if that sounds good to you, Tufan and Dan.
Definitely. Sure.
Great. So it starts with this formula here, and this formula w- was shown by this is a drawing that Fuller had in Synergetics that I kind of recreated because any form of this that I found online was a little bit pixelated and hard to kind of see, so I kind of recreated it. But that formula has to do with the number of relationships between events in universe. And so the formula is n squared minus n over 2, n being the number of events, and uh, so the number of relationships between those events is the number of events squared minus the number of events over 2. And that's true for as many events as you can have in universe. The relationship between those events is always going to be n squared minus n over 2. So it's pretty straightforward. Number two is Euler's uh, polyhedral formula, uh, which is the number of vertexes plus the number of faces in any polyhedron equals the number of edges plus 2. And that's true for any polyhedron uh, that we can have up. And I, I'm hoping everybody in this group is familiar with these terms, polyhedra and uh, the like. So a polyhedron is if you were to take a polygon and which is a 2D representation of a, a polyvertexia. Um, a polyhedron then would be a 3D object that has an inside and an outside and has polygonal faces. So number three shows, and it's these four geometries here. This shows if you were to take either rods or pencils or some circular thing and look down the barrel of it, and you're packing those rods together, if you were, or pennies, if you were to take pennies and put them on a table, um, and you were to lay those pennies out in a square form, like you see on the left here, they would be in a state of they would be wobbly, let's say, their relationship. They could still roll around one another. And those pennies would naturally collapse into a state of triangulation. And that's what you see here. That once when they're in this state, they're a bit insecure, if you will. And that
They have
insecure,
more space between each other compared to the one on the
yeah.
right.
Yeah, so they take up more space. They're a bit insecure. They're wobbly. They can roll around one another, but they col they naturally collapse into a state of closest packing. And that closest packing will always be triangulated. You will always be able to draw relationships between those circles, those pennies, uh, and those relationships will always be triangulated. And
It was sort of Bucky's favorite place to start when he was admonishing the architects. He'd always say, "Well, you know, you put a cube and it's floppy, but if you arrange triangles and multiples of tetra, the thing holds together much tighter and stronger." And then he says we need to redesign houses based on that efficiency of use of materials. That's where he started every time.
yeah, and if you were to build a house with this figure on the left here and had no bracing,
That's right.
that house would collapse.
It'd be floppy.
Yeah.
Where
And
tetra triangles, strong.
yeah, and if you go to any job site, any construction site, all of the walls and are braced and brought into integrity through triangulation.
Yeah. And that began his whole conversation about efficiency of use of materials based on tetra in nature. Mhm.
Yeah. So then if you were if you were to kind of simplify, if you were to start with a nuclear circle, a penny, and you were to closest pack pennies all around that nuclear penny, you could only fit six equal radius pennies around that one penny to have all pennies touching one another. And you can see they're all triangulated, and that creates a hexagon. Those uh, relationships between pennies would be, and the nuclear penny would all be omnitriangulated and starting to show that there's a hexagonal matrix, if you will, being revealed. And that hexagonal matrix can be the more layers you pack onto uh, into that, the more pennies you pack, it'll be omnitriangulated and continue hexagonally, uh, continue in a hexagon.
Casey, are you able to enlarge your screen to full screen, you think?
Oh, to not have these toolbars. Let's
To
see.
make it maybe bigger? Denmark asks.
You know, it's actually Casey has zoomed in pretty nicely. It's
Yeah,
visible.
that was very nice what you did.
Yeah, that was okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Casey.
I
Continue.
actually can't, because I'm in this screen share, it's not
Oh,
giving me
that's
the
it.
option.
That's okay. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine.
this is great.
I can zoom in
Thank you.
however far into this as well.
It's sort
Um,
of the hex there is beginning to feel like we're getting to flower of life here too.
right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you were to take each of these circles now and expand them to where their edges are going through the centers of the circle next to them, it would be a flower of life then. So number four here. So because of that integrity and triangulation, there's a fascinating thing that Bucky discovered that we often talk about squaring and cubing. Square like uh, one squared is one, two squared is two, three squared is nine. But he said that because nature's not using squares, we shouldn't be using that as our foundational way of exponentially growing things, because you can achieve the same results by triangling. So, uh, in that same way, one triangled is one. Two triangled is 4. There's four triangle areas here. Uh, 3 triangled is 9. There's 9 triangle areas here. And so he was saying that because nature's not using squares, we should be using triangle as our foundational way of conceptualizing these exponential growths and tetrahedral growths. Because the same thing happens with cubing. We say 1 cubed is 1, 2 cubed is 8. And so that and 3 cubed is 27. But he said we could also do the same thing using tetrahedrons. One tetrahedron, this is the thing that we don't have worked out, is how awkward that is to say. One tetrahedron is 1, 2 tetrahedron is 8, just the same as cubing. And again, because nature's not using cubes, we should be referring to it these exponential growths and triangling and tetrahedroning, referring to the integrity that's at the heart of it all. So number 6. So circles in themselves are purely conceptual. They don't necessarily exist. You draw a circle on a chalkboard, and that circle is actually a very shallow depth cylinder. It is the depth of that circle on the chalkboard is a cylinder with a depth that is as thick as the chalk left on the board. There's no such thing as a circle with zero depth. Uh, and so these ideas that we're having down here, when thought of as pennies, pennies are cylinders with the thickness of a penny. Uh, but a circle with zero depth and kind of like on a piece of paper or in digital like this doesn't really exist in itself. So Bucky talks about the first conceptual thing that we can see or perceive is something with an inside and an outside and has depth to it. So, and the first thing that has an inside and an outside is a series of 4-star events and a series of 4-star events in relationship to one another. Closest packed spheres is a tetrahedron. The Oops. If you see each of these spheres as an event happening in universe, the closest packing of those events, those considerations, are in their simplest form a tetrahedron. And that's the first thing that with an inside and an outside, conceptually, that uh, we can put meaning to and have I guess all other things arise out of in universe.
Joseph asks if that's could be thought of as an example of growing by inversion, kind of a kind of turning inside out, whereas which is not possible in 90-degree angles.
Hmm. Oh, that's interesting. I would have to maybe hear more about that. He Bucky talked about the tetrahedron being the symbol of all physical and metaphysical experiences in universe. And the metaphysical of this, and this is what Joseph, his comment made me think, is the tetrahedron, the physical tetrahedron, is the inside outed metaphysical tetrahedron. And so Bucky talked about how the metaphysical tetrahedron pulses into the physical and then back into the metaphysical. And if you were to see this ball, this event, this vertex pass through the center of the nest of the other three and out the other side, you would have a inverted version of this tetrahedron. And that pumping action of the physical into the metaphysical and back into the physical is what Bucky called is like removing a glove off of your hand. When you're wearing the glove, the fingers are like this, but when you take it off, all of a sudden you have a glove for the other hand. You have the reversed glove, the inversed glove. And so, yeah,
Casey, that sounds like a pentatope, the 4D of tetrahedron, how you describe it, moving in and out. Um,
mm,
this is also something that Terry Burns is with us here. She's an expert on Ophanic rituals and using the pentateuch structures to invoke or banish um, energies by using those geometries. And the way you explained the vertexes moving in and out just it resembled the 4D tetrahedron, which is a pentatope, I believe. Just
mm.
wanted to share that.
That's
Interesting. Yeah,
great.
I've never heard that before.
That's creative. Also, it reminds me of, in physics, they agree that mass is what happens during the blinking on and off called Planck time.
Uh-huh.
So it literally is blinking on and off, and in between the blinks, it turned inside out.
Yeah. Yeah, so for Bucky, Uh, Synergetics is the modeling of generalized principles in universe, and those generalized principles apply to physical and metaphysical reality, and that we often think of uh, the metaphysical as something that is uh, free of these conceptual geometries, but to Bucky, all of universe and events in universe were acting in accordance to these patterns of integrity that uh, expressed itself, like the physical universe being the fingerprints or the residue of the metaphysical, that they're not this like separated thing, that it's actually a pulsating unity, if you will.
Uh, Graham Hancock might call that fingerprints of the gods too.
Hmm. So number eight here is an octahedron. So we're going to get into what the why the octahedron's special here in a minute, but if you were to just take four balls and spheres and nest them on a table, a fifth ball would fit in the nest on top there. Almost, I like to think of it as nests. Like you're almost like laying an egg in the top of the nest there, and there's also one in the bottom. And if and that these are all in closest packing, and if you were to draw lines of relationship between those six spheres, you would reveal an octahedron. And the relationship between the tetrahedron and the octahedron is fascinating because in it there's I could go I can go off on so many tangents here, but I want to kind of keep it focused on the simplicity of this and that a tetrahedron in itself can be subdivided, or if you were to take if you were to take the one tetrahedron and match it with pair it with uh, four other tetrahedrons, you inadvertently reveal a core octahedron in be inside of the relationship of those four other tetrahedrons. And that octahedron is nested in between the relationships of those tetrahedra. It's a bit hard to talk about, I'm finding.
Well,
Putting this
actually,
into words,
no,
into
but
something that can be understood is,
in the center of Star Mother, the two interdigitated tetra embed an octa in the center and a cube on the outside. It's very nicely visible, that perfect embedding in the Star Mother kit.
Maybe just another simplistic way of explaining it could be, especially one of the teachings of Drunvalo, he would talk about the star tetrahedron where two tetrahedrons are connected. And
mm,
if you try to visualize the connection point at the center where both tetrahedrons share commonly, that's an octahedron, exactly. So if you look
Exactly.
at the two star
Right.
tetrahedrons, the common areas that they share are in the form of octahedron. Maybe another way of um,
yeah.
explaining it.
Exactly.
Wanted to
Yeah,
add?
so these exposed faces here of red, if you were just to add inverted tetrahedra on those, so these tetrahedrons are pointing upwards, let's say, uh,
Right.
and if you were to add four more tetrahedrons to the exposed faces of the octahedron here, you would have the star tetrahedron, like Tufan's saying.
Exactly. Mm.
So I'm gonna go instead of going in numerical order here, we would go to this one first, but I'm actually gonna go to this one first. Uh, this is what Bucky called the isotropic vector matrix. Everywhere the same energy conditions is how he described it. And what this is if you were to take tetrahedra alone, they can't fill all space. Tetrahedrons, if you were to pack them together, they can't fill all space. They would have octahedral cavities in between them. And those octahedral cavities, because the tetrahedron is the most fundamental form in universe, it's the prime form of universe. Uh, Bucky sensed that all of universe needs to be quantized into these considerable packets of information that that universe isn't just some random array of uh, events that are just related in in chaos, that actually nature and universe naturally closest packs. It expresses and transfers energy through the most economic lines of force. And that those economic lines of force are actually the vectors of relationship between events and universe. And so, since universe is using tetrahedra to transfer energy, it must be filling all space with octahedra. And the octet truss, the the alternating tetrahedron octahedron matrix that is filling all space, accounts for all energy transferences in universe. Uh, and those relating through uh, lines of force reveal other polyhedra, one of them being what Bucky called the vector equilibrium, the cube octahedron, also known as in science. And that's in purple here. And just through the closest packing of spheres and the closest packing of tetrahedra and octahedra, we inadvertently reveal other topological uh, beings like the cube octahedron. And Bucky saw this as a very important model of the 0 point, if you will, in universe, nothingness in universe, complete equilibrium. And this is something that he said that universe never rests in. The universe never rests in equilibrium. There's this constant pulsating uh, movement that there's an ideal, a conceptual idealism that can be captured when we look at a vector equilibrium like this. Uh, but that the universe never rests there. There's this movement always happening.
I think it's beautiful that how the cube octa is revealed in there, and that the cube octa is the beginning of the vector flexor. And when the vector flexes in the jitterbug, the charge collapse goes from a hex symmetry to a pent symmetry, and that's where later that collapsing jitterbug cube octa that inspired by Bucky later revealed a whole nother level of physics here, which is tetracubic structures, all ratios were power of 2 octave, which in physics actually creates maximum destructive wave interference, which means collapse is absolutely not possible. So all tetracubic structures in the universe absolutely cannot charge collapse. Beautiful for stability, but the opposite of implosion. Whereas when it jitterbugs to pent symmetries,
Mm.
dodecacosa, then you have golden ratio. Then the heterodynes are perfectly implosive and do create a center and do create charge collapse. So later, this introduced the idea that was inspired by Bucky originally, that the actual physics of implosion was specifically when you went from hex to pent, because in wave mechanics is the power of 2 relationships of all cubic structures is the opposite of charge collapse, max destructive interference, whereas the pent golden ratio is the precise essence of charge collapse and therefore enables a center point.
Interesting.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Dan.
I find
And
that so fascinating.
so while we are here, there's one question about this geometry that you were talking about. Dan Mac, our friend, asks, I can see multiple right angle triangles. So would the right angle triangle be the building shape for all forms? He may be referring to the 3D reflections of the tetrahedrons there.
Well, the
Right
right angle might be
angle.
the octa there. So the right angle is the octa in the center, maybe that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what he's referring to with the right angle triangles. There's
Because on the
maybe
3D form, you see the vertical lines. Maybe he thought they were the right angle triangles, but because it's a 3D,
yeah, because of perspective and
yeah,
depth,
could
it
be.
might be
Yeah.
creating the illusion of right angle triangles, but all of these are equilateral triangles. So
Right.
all of
So
the
there are no
figures,
right angle triangles. Actually, it's because of the perspective that he sees it that way.
Yep.
yeah,
But in the embedded octa, you do have right
yeah,
angles.
yeah. So if you were to look at like the octahedron here, uh, if you were to draw from a vertex to the center and then up to another vertex, you have a right angle triangle there.
Right.
I guess it is from my perspective, but I was just wondering because if you just, it is because of three-dimensional, but I see a bunch of right angle triangles, everywhere I look, and it is a perspective, but um, because if it's an equilateral triangle, you go from the center base up to the point, and then it's mirrored.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if you were to split an equilateral triangle down the center, you'd have two right angle triangles. Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm looking at on your screen, and that's why I asked the question.
Maybe a phase conjugate mirror.
So what was the question again? If those right angle triangles are
Well, he said,
Basic
Reflection lines.
building, I guess it would just be, you'd just be taking a octa or a tetrahedron shape and dividing it in half. But that would only work with the face, a
well,
single
so
face.
so let's hold on to that idea because we're going to get into something that I think touches upon a right angle triangle that could maybe shed some light on maybe some questions you have.
Okay.
Sure.
How much time do I have? Should I be kind of moving through this quickly, or do I have some time?
well, you can
Uh,
take at least another 20 minutes or whatever. Just
Okay.
we are flexible.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, uh, Bucky s saw that the building blocks of a tetrahedron, uh, that events in universe could be quantized into least common denominator ingredients, if you will. And one of those were what he called the modules. So there's many different modules in Synergetics. A modules, B modules, T and E modules, S modules. Did I just break up or did you hear all this so far?
You're all good. Yeah, we can hear you.
You're good.
Uh, this is the A module in Synergetics, and the A module quantizes the tetrahedron. It breaks it into the smallest subdivision that is the least common denominator. This is the thing that can be broken into of self-similar uh, components. And if you look, uh, there's six A modules per face in a tetrahedron. So there's 24 A modules in a tetrahedron. And those 24 modules are equal in volume to one another. And as you can see here, it goes from mid edge of a tetrahedron to the center of a face, and then up to the center of volume. And that triangle there is a right angle triangle. And so these right angle triangle uh, irregular tetrahedra break or quantize are the quantum modules of experience in universe, the smallest self-similar repeating pattern polyhedron that universe can be broken into. And a B module, so since the isotropic vector matrix is a series of tetrahedra and octahedra, the octahedron can also be quantized into modules, self-similar modules, repeating, uh, but it is made up of two types of modules. The green here being the A module that we just saw in the tetrahedron, and the blue being a B module. So the pairing of A and B modules quantizes the isotropic vector matrix into discrete packets of energy accounting that we can account for all any energy transferences in universe through the pairing of modules, and the A and the B module are equal in volume. And so Bucky was fascinated by the ability to uh, consider events in universe through these discrete relationships that quantized those events into equal volume relationships.
Uh,
So
and
that
we
gets
might
me
just
to
just to say for the record here that in physics, we now know all of physics is quantized only and specifically by Planck. And what we proved was stellations by golden ratio, which is fractality embedding perfected, predict precisely how Planck stellates because that's called Planck fire. And we predicted 200 physical variables by Planck times golden ratio, which is the opposite of what's happening in a tetrahedron. But still, I think there's a volumetric aspect of that, which still makes Bucky's thinking creative here.
so the golden ratio aspect of all this comes into this form that we're looking at here. And this is
Good.
the E module, the T or the E module. It's a bit
Okay.
complicated to get into the difference between T and E. I'm not going to get into why he differentiated the T and the E module, but they're basically this. If we're looking at it like this is both a representation of a T and an E module. The E module uh, being what he referred to as the Einstein module. And we can see here, it also has a volume of 1. So it is 1/120th of a rhombic tricontohedron. And a rhombic tricontohedron has 120, or no, sorry, has uh, 30 uh, it has 30 uh, golden ratio rhombus faces that can be split into four. The smallest common denominator of a rhombic tricontohedron is an E module, a T or an E module. And that, so if you were to split one of the golden ratio faces into four and then connect the vertexes of that to the center of volume in the rhombic tricontohedron, you would have the geometric volumetric accounting for the rhombic tricontohedron.
No, that's beautiful. And by the way, the rhombic tricontra is obviously all about golden ratio, which is gorgeous. And I would even mention that William Buehler, our Templar geometrist, he was all about rhombic tricontra as well.
I have a really amazing graphic that I would like to show at the end of this conversation that has to do with this. But for now, we'll just keep moving along. So this is a rhombic dodecahedron, and this is what Bucky called a spheric because it is the closest uh, closest polyhedron to being able to account for a sphere in the isotropic vector matrix. So it there's not really much to say about this one, but Bucky found it an important polyhedron to represent a spheric. Um, Here I just show how the vector equilibrium that we saw here can be exploded, if you will, into its components, which are half octahedrons in red. So there's 3 half octahedrons or 6 half octahedrons, uh, and three. So that's the volume of 3 octahedra in here, and 8 tetrahedrons. And Bucky was very big on seeing the volumetric relationships of these events in universe. And so because there's 3 octahedra and 8 tetrahedra, a tetrahedron being a volume of 1, uh, and the octahedron being a volume of 4, you get uh, you can quantize the volume of the vector equilibrium into tetravolumes. And he saw what he called the concentric hierarchy in synergetics is the volumetric accounting based on the volume 1 tetrahedron. And so that's kind of what all of synergetics stems from is this relationships through equal volumes. And that's why even the E module, even though it's not uh, the same, it like you don't find this in the isotropic vector matrix in this form, it still is quantized according to the volume 1. It still matches with a volume 1 tetrahedron and the quantization into modules.
And just to say here that although physics doesn't use the ratio of volume so much, there was a precedent here that Bucky introduced gorgeously that this is a first look at how you nest vortex platonically. And it's specifically a platonic nest of vortex tetracube dodecacosa, which specifically is the only way both electron shells, SPDF, and nuclear hadrons nest by platonic nest of vortex. And we now know later that it's a platonic nest of vortex specifically that enables charge collapse, which makes the gravity that holds them together after you realize that platonic nesting is how you make golden ratio.
Hmm. Yeah, the amount of ways that I've seen golden ratio arise out of the relationship between polyhedra is fascinating. I have a bunch of graphics that show that as well, which you can see on my website if we don't have time to talk about those
Yes,
things right
but in
now.
summary, the only way to get a tetracube octa embedded in dodecacosa is golden ratio everywhere.
So number 15 here is showing how it's kind of out of order here, maybe a little bit, but if you look here, this is an icosahedron, and that icosahedron, if you were to grow, this triangle here is basically this face of the icosahedron. And if you were to increase the frequency of that icosahedron, you start to get into the realms of geodesics. And the geodesic subdivision of an icosahedron starts to approximate a sphere. You're starting to, as that triangular face of an icosahedron uh, is given more vertexes, it approximates a sphere. And Bucky talked about how there are no classical Greek spheres in universe of these infinite plane, like a surface with zero gaps in it. Like if you look anywhere in universe, you're not going to find a solid surface. It's all relationships, all high frequency polyhedral relationships. And if you're to look at relationships of cells or relationships of atoms or relationships of planets, all of these things are uh, polyhedral. Th there's no such thing as a surface with no openings.
Which is to say that all membranes are simply a summary of wavelengths nested in infinite frequency icosa, which is beautiful. It's introduction to membrane theory. Just say one more thing with that picture of the icosa there versus the cube octa to its left. That's what we learned from Bucky's vector flexor collapsing was that when you nest 12 spheres around one, you have the cube octa on the left. But if you remove the 13th one from the center and it collapses, implodes, then it becomes icosa to the right. And that's called the 13-1, the crisis one, and the 13th touches the other one. And there's all kinds of wave metaphysics. It's a beautiful introduction to many spiritual concepts.
Yeah, so this graphic here, number 19, shows what Dan was showing with his vector flexor. I have a vector flexor in the other room, but uh, he has one right there. Yeah. So you start in a cube octahedron state here, and then as the two polar triangular faces approach one another, as it starts to collapse, you get the form of an icosahedron here, which would have six missing struts, if you will. But if you were to add those struts in it, it would become uh, uh, a structure, you could see the icosahedron,
And
and
then,
then
then
it,
octa, and then
yep, and then
tetra,
it further collapses into an icosahedron. I mean,
octa,
an octahedron, and then
Tetra.
down into a tetrahedral state. So that's what
And
Bucky called the jitterbug.
Exactly.
right. And those vector flexors are available at geometricmodels.org.
Oh,
And
great.
I learned that personally from Bucky.
So I'm kind of just going to rush through these last few things because I only have a few minutes. But the closest packing of spheres revealed a cube octahedron vector equilibrium. That closest packing of spheres can continue outwardly, and you'll just get higher and higher frequency vector equilibria. So that's what that graphic shows. Here, number 20, these two are related. So this is the spherical version of this, and this is what Bucky uh, this is one of my favorite parts of synergetics. And it's basically if you spin any polyhedron, you get uh, great circle equators. So if you were to spin any polyhedron that based on its vertexes, edges, and faces, if you were to put a pole through the center of the faces, through the center of a vertex, and through the center of a mid-edge, you would get these spin equators. And those spin equators uh, uh, give you the topological ingredients to be able to model uh, many different polyhedra in universe. Not only that, but Bucky talked about these being the railroad tracks of energy between spherical phenomena in universe. And so these are the most economic lines of relationship in spherical coordinate systems. And so yeah, that what 20 and 21 are showing is the 25 great circles of the vector equilibrium and the 31 great circles of the icosahedron. And this is something that you can go down a rabbit hole and learn about a lot through synergetics and kind of spend a lot of time on. I'm just gonna leave it at that, but
But
there
maybe the rabbit hole there, Bucky really never talked about charge or wave mechanics. It wasn't his thing. But the preview he did, that fullerene later was named after him. Really, he would have been clueless. But the reason they named fullerene after him, because it looked like dodecahedron, of course. And what very few people know is when you rotate a fullerene, which is a conjugator, you make gravity. Meditate on that one. Our carbon nano team is doing that.
Thank you, Dan.
so
And I
I,
would like to
I just
thank Casey and
well I just want to share one last
sure,
thing if
go
possible.
ahead.
So we were talking about phi ratio earlier, and there's so many different ways in which I found phi ratio arising out of
Yeah.
geometric relationships. And one of them that I wanted to touch upon was how we were talking about um, the rhombic triicosahedron, the E mod and the E module. So the rhombic triicosahedron with its 30 golden rhombus faces and the 120 E modules that it has. So if you look here, if you're to create these little caps out of many different E modules, and you were to pack them into the convex faces of this is called a rhombic hexacantahedron. And if you were to pack them into the 12, so this is basically a indented dodecahedron, a pentagonal dodecahedron. If you were to kind of scoop out these golden rhombus uh, little forms out of it, you'd get a rhombic hexacantahedron. And if you were to pack these E module I kind of see them as like little gemstones. If you were to pack those golden ratio gemstones into the 12 faces, convex faces of the rhombic hexacantahedron, you get a phi ratio scaled rhombic tricantahedron. So this gold rhombic tricontrahedron in the bottom right here is golden ratio scaled up from the white one up here in the top left. And so there's these fascinating relationships that happen between polyhedra that get the scaling to happen that I find completely fascinating, and I have no idea why. I
It's
just,
gorgeous. Gorgeous. I
I've
believe it
been
is actually,
following these like phi ratio trails, and
yeah,
I really
it's
have no
gorgeous.
idea the implications about them.
The implication is clearly electrical. Just to say, I believe it's triconta, not tricontra, tricantahedron, actually.
Triconta, yeah.
But you know the Templars were all over this. I will say the triconta for obvious reasons.
So these are also available at Casey's Instagram account, which is, I believe, at Synergetics University, right? And
Yeah,
also
so
on your website.
my Instagram is Synergetic at Synergetics University. My website is syn-u.com, and this is the Synergetics University portion of the website. And here you'll find information about Bucky and some basic exploration of synergetics and some of the basic concepts. So yeah, if you want to learn more, just check out my website or get in
Beautiful,
touch.
Great.
I'm happy to.
Great.
beautiful.
And I'm sure there are many things that we have not touched upon yet about the philosophical understandings of some other Buckminster Fuller's work. And we are very much interested in supporting Casey's work and help you reach out to more audience. And we are looking forward to expanding more on these lectures, Casey.
Thank you so much for the support, Tufan, and all of your amazing words that and like just for believing in my art. That is
Beautiful
a
graphics, just
huge
beautiful.
support. So thank you.
We love geometry and we really love your artwork. It's colorful, it's very nice, it's very simplistic, and I think you do a great service in teaching people these perspectives.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dan, also for just allowing me to share this. I think this is some of the most important work of our times. Bucky's outlining of synergetics, to me, is can really bring humanity into a new age of consideration. And so I think this is very important. So thank you for giving me the platform to be able to share this with such an
It's
audience.
wonderful, wonderful. And your passion adds the value. It's all good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
And if you guys are interested in all this, I highly recommend that you pick up one of these posters that I designed with Tufan and from geometric models and learn more about synergetics through the poster.
And you too
Thank
can
you.
titbug.
Perfect. So I think we don't have much questions on the chat box. Let me see.
I have one little story I'd like to, but are there any
Go
questions?
ahead.
So the little story is we started a community in North Carolina called Circle of Life, Waynesville, North Carolina. It was not only days after John Denver personally installed the geodesic sphere that Bucky designed, actually in Waynesville. It's called the Biodome Community. And so, there's this biodome down there. And of course, you go in that biodome and you actually realize that it's one of the most geopathic structures in the history of humanity. And we later learned why, actually, which I don't think the Fuller people quite realized. Well, of course, if I had another friend that made a geodesic out of wood, and actually he also went crazy in that sphere. It turns out that there's a reason Mother Nature never lives inside a sphere, because a sphere is literally monoharmonic. So biology will never use a sphere because it's harmonic inclusiveness that predicts vitality in every living thing, and a sphere is the opposite. It's harmonic exclusive. But there's more than that. Then if you make that sphere out of metal, it is the opposite of high dielectric, the opposite of implosion, the opposite of charge distribution. And it's actually charge collapse in high dielectric that makes life. So you got a sphere, and then you got the worst dielectric metal, and you make the most poisonous structure in the history of the planet. And this is the geodesic zones everywhere famous for Bucky. And I tried to tell the Fuller Institute, hello. To understand what geopathic means, you need to understand charge collapse. But Bucky was so close in preview. All of the people who studied Bucky arrived at really profound stuff electrically, even though Bucky did not have anything to do with charge or wave mechanics or anything like that. The Bucky had all the beautiful ideas because when people started studying his jitterbug, that was the origin of superconductivity. That was the origin of charge collapse. All of Nassim and actually Tom Sawyer made that famous originally. Anyway, long story. So I'm just saying that, and the fact that Buckminster fullerene, the hottest subject in all of modern chemistry, was named after Bucky, even though Bucky wouldn't have had a clue of why it's magic, which is because the center of the fullerene is a phase conjugator, like a monatomic hydrogen or clathrates or a microhydrogen. You stick monatomic hydrogen in the center of a clathrate or a fullerene, suddenly you've got a negentropic electrical environment. That's why it's the hottest subject in all of modern chemistry. So there's so many things that Bucky planted the seed for, even though, electrically, but that's why when I was an electrical engineer and went over to play with the architects, that's when so many seeds were planted for me. There's my 2 cents.
Thanks. But Bucky was great. He really pioneered this understanding of geometric principles. Of course, there are many things that is added on it
Came
thanks
after
to
him.
Bucky.
Yes.
And it's also very instructive in understanding self-organization and how the self-organizing systems like atomic table or solar system or other heavenly systems are structured by understanding the geometric nesting principles. So, yeah.
But do we miss any questions in the listing here, Tufan? Or
I just wanted to say something. So, looking at the A, B, C, the shapes, all of those shapes are right angle triangles, right? So when you connect the vertexes and stuff, I mean, I still see all kinds of right angle triangles. Those are the lowest common denominator of volume. So in a
Which shapes
sense,
were you referring to exactly?
So
uh,
all the modules
all of them,
are right angle triangles. Yeah, they have right angle triangle faces.
yeah. So I guess, I mean, that's the only reason why I brought it up because I just kept seeing, right angle triangles and you switch them however you change their perspective and it's still a right angle triangle. I mean, the lowest
Yeah.
common denominator, not an equilateral
Right.
triangle, but if you go from center up and
Yeah.
it's a mirrored image.
Uh-huh.
If you take the
Yeah. So
modules of
he,
the pyramids, you also get right angle triangles, right?
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead,
so
Casey. Sorry.
Bucky talked about right and left-handedness in the modules. So they're all mirrors of uh the 24A modules has 12 left-handed and 12 right-handed modules, and they're mirrors of one another, and they pair to the yeah.
That would give physical matter, I guess, the duality, right? That's what I was referring to.
But the
well,
duality is a whole other thing. Bucky talked about the unity. Unity is plural and at minimum two, and that two is the polarity in any system. Uh, and he talked about how Euler's t t polyhedral formula, the V plus F equals E plus 2. The additive 2 there at the end is the two-ness that is in all form, because there's always an inside and an outside. There's always uh, uh, yeah, so it's a whole thing that he was very big on, is that polarity, the always two-ness in universe, that there is no unity, isn't one, unity is plural.
this is another beautiful area where Bucky led profound thinkers into their most, powerful ideas. For example, we now know that every living protein has an antiomorphic handedness that goes one way only. And for decades, biology didn't have a clue of why the helical direction of every living protein goes one way only. Hello? Well, actually, Bucky was onto it indirectly because we now know that the plus and minus DC polarity of lightning that stirred the protein that made primal soup, only the polarity of that lightning, which was centripetal and not centrifugal, allowed the proteins to implode and become DNA and not explode. And so you needed the centripetal force, which is handed. And that's even a clue to only one DC polarity of a magnet is centripetal to heal, and the other is centrifugal. One will increase pain and one will decrease pain. So the origin of centripetal forces, there's a clue in Bucky introducing us to handedness.
Wow, that's so fascinating, Dan. The way you think, I have so much to learn. A lot of the terminology you use, I'm still such a novice in, and so I'm fascinated by the way you see phi ratio and scaling and implosion and all of that.
Well, like,
I
there's
I'm
really
curious
one.
the connection between it and synergetics.
Well, there is only one simple key. We wrote the equations to prove that golden ratio is the absolute maximum of perfected constructive interference, therefore compression and collapse and implosion. Whereas octave, tetra, cube, octa, all tetracubic structures, powers of two, is the absolute opposite. It's absolute max destructive interference, which means absolutely not compressible, which is beautiful. You take a tetracube and you can't squeeze it. It's very unsqueezable. And that's good if you want to make a snowflake, for example. You could put a hex on you for a witch who would serve the opposite function by putting a pent on you. So all of those ideas, even though Bucky didn't finish the electrical discussion, he started the conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, and I kind of see synergetics and uh, the outlining of it almost like what physics is or calculus. It's not reaching an end goal. It's basically giving people tools to then discover uh, new things with it and develop new things with it. And it's almost like an ideal. This is It's kind of like what I was saying about the vector equilibrium earlier. The universe doesn't rest in this state of a perfect equilibrium, that there's a movement to it. And I think that movement is kind of what I've been seeing from phi ratio and all these things is
Yeah, the
that,
movement is ultimately implosion, actually, which
yeah.
causes gravity and consciousness. So we discovered charge collapse, the cause of implosion, and all negentropy because of the years I spent with Bucky. Really, I should be grateful personally.
Hmm.
Cool. Well, Casey, you are to be congratulated on your dedication here, and may we become shareable waves. The metaphor I'm just suggesting is if you add to what Bucky started so beautifully, the idea about charge collapse, then suddenly everything literally implodes together. You realize the reason you want to nest platonics, which is the only way the atomic table, nucleus and electrons are made, is specifically a nest of platonics. It's the only definition of all chemistry and gravity planetary orbitals is specifically platonic nest because that makes charge collapse. And that's what makes gravity and all centripetal forces, all negentropy, ultimately gravity and consciousness itself are made by that. And Bucky started us thinking correctly to get there.
Right.
So, uh, I just somebody just said something in the chat. Liz said the sum is greater than the parts, and I can't believe I forgot to even mention this. I was going to start the whole talk with this that Bucky talked about synergy, and synergy being the behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of the parts taken separately. And so, if we were to put that into an example, if you were to remove one of the cells from my body and look at it under a microscope, you wouldn't be able to predict the personality that is Casey. Casey is a verb. Casey arises out of the relationship between a trillion cells to express a personality that we call Casey. And Casey is a synergy. Casey is the behavior of a whole system acting together to express the personality that we know as Casey. So,
And yet,
Thank you.
in fractal holography, in the hologram, one part can contain information about the whole if the compression is perfect. So that leads us to the next conversation. It's all beautiful. So, well, congratulations. Thank you so much, Casey, for all of your enthusiasm and your website. We'll put the links in the video, and the video often has 5 to 10,000 views the first week. And we want to thank Tufan for bringing Casey to us, and we look forward to working together more in the future. Anything else,
Yes,
Tufan? Thank
definitely.
you, Casey.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for joining us, Casey, and we are happy to support your work in the future and expand this in a more detailed way. And thanks everyone for joining us.
May we all become synergetic.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Blessings, Casey. Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you, Dan Mac, Tino,
Thank you, Casey.
Joseph,
Bye,
Lynn.
everyone.
Thanks for coming, everybody. We had some fun. See you next week.